Hello, this is Gary Revel, and again, you may know me as Gary Revel, and that's okay. I did my first podcast, and what I'm talking about is my investigation of the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy and the Nobel Peace Prize winner, the civil rights leader, the Reverend and the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The fact, James Earl Ray was more or less set up to take the fall for this. Anyway, he was in a bar in Canada, and he met with two gentlemen, E. Howard Hunt, and a fellow by the name of Lucian Sarti. And at that time, Lucian was the more or less mafia godfather of Canada. As time went on and they developed him, so to speak, he ended up being in Memphis on the day of the assassination, April 4th. The case, if the case had gone to trial, which they made sure that it wouldn't by threatening Jimmy. I got to where I called him Jimmy, James Earl Ray. His attorney basically told him, if you don't sign this stipulation saying that you're guilty, and he wasn't even trying to tell him you were the one who did it. He was just saying because you was associated with these guys, we're going to set you up and you're going to get found guilty and we're going to put you in the electric chair. You're going to burn, basically. If you don't sign this, we're going to arrest your father, put him back in prison, and we're going to arrest your brother and charge him with being an accomplice and put him in prison. So Jimmy was looking at being found guilty, sentenced to death, and dying in the electric chair. His father going back to prison and his brother back to prison if he did not sign that stipulation, as he understood it from his attorney, in a way that he was somehow involved. Well, when it went to the hearing, they never did a trial. They never had a trial. Jimmy stood up in court and said, well, I agree, but I don't agree with the prosecutor. No, the prosecutor was making the case. The prosecutor was saying he did it. And Jimmy stood up and said, I don't agree. I signed this stipulation and all, but I don't agree with the prosecutor. So he was not agreeing with the charges that he was being presented with. Now, at that time, his attorney stood up and reached over and put his left hand on his hand on his shoulder, whichever, and pushed him back down to his seat and just told the judge, basically just go on with the case. Now, judges and attorneys have told me that in most cases where the defendant actually speaks in court and says he don't agree with the charges, the judge would stop it and say, no, wait a minute, defendant, you can't plead guilty and say you don't agree with the guilt, what you're pleading guilty to. They just went on, they found him guilty and sentenced him to 99 years in prison. Of course, the next day when Jimmy woke up in prison, he realized what had happened, and he started coming out of this trance he had been in, and they'd kept him under 24-hour-a-day lights and cameras for the whole time he was in the Memphis jail, so that he didn't have any privacy at all, not even with his attorney or anything. And he told me and others that he felt dazed and confused most of the time. Anyway, he wasn't in a good mental state. But then the first good night's sleep he had in prison, he woke up and realized what had happened, and he immediately wrote the judge a letter disagreeing with what had happened, disagreeing with that he had pled guilty. He said, I'm not pleading guilty. And the judge had took that into consideration and was sitting at his desk. A short while later, he was sitting at his desk ready to give James Earl Ray the trial that he didn't get. But unfortunately, that judge battle was found with his head slumped over on that desk and dead that very day. Now, of course, if it had gone to trial, they would have had to have a murder weapon. And unfortunately for the government's case, they didn't have a murder weapon because the rifle that James Earl Ray had bought and the rifle that they had proposed that he had left on the street right after the shooting did not match the bullet that was found in Martin Luther King that was supposedly the cause of his death. It never did. We tried many times we had tests done over again a number of times to prove that bullet came from that rifle, but we've never been able to do that. They would have had another problem in proving that he was even in the rooming house when the shot was fired, because he was actually down the street at a service station, and there was a man at the service station who would have testified that he was there instead of being at the place where the crime was committed. So that's just a few. That's just a couple of top things on my mind. I mean, I'm not reading or I'm not looking at notes. I'm just telling you the truth about what happened. James Earl Ray, my investigation found that he did not kill Martin Luther King Jr. He could not have killed Martin Luther King Jr. And they had no case to prove that he did. And so they just forced him into a guilty plea, and he spent the rest of his life in prison. Okay, now that's, I'll get into some other things on my next podcast, but that'll be off of this one. Talk to you later. Bye.
Early in the evening, the sun was going down. He stood on the balcony in a troubled part of town, calling to the singer, said, "Sing my favorite song."